My name is Rowena Carlyle, and I am the reason 14 people are still breathing today. That might sound dramatic, but sometimes the truth is, they said I was paranoid. They said I was confused, stubborn, and too old to understand modern systems. They patted my hand and told me to rest. They chuckled when I complained about faulty alarms and flickering lights. They called it residual trauma, blamed it on my past, on age, on loneliness. But they didn't know that in the quiet corners of my memory, fire still lives. I was a fire inspector in the late 70s, the only woman on my shift for nearly a decade. I saw more smoke than sunlight some years. I crawled through collapsed roofs, dragged men out of caved-in stairwells, and I've seen what it looks like when a fire wins. And I've also seen what it looks like when someone could have done something, but didn't. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth, because you might actually regret missing out on this dramatic story. It was 2 when I woke to the sound that used to be my anthem, a fire alarm shrill and broken like a throat trying to scream through smoke. Not the kind of test tone you'd hear at noon on Wednesdays. No, this was fractured, gasping, erratic. I sat up so fast it hurt. My old bones aren't what they used to be. I pulled on my slippers, wrapped my shawl around me, and reached for the cane I kept by the nightstand. No response in the hallway. No shuffling footsteps. No startled cries. Just the hum of machines and the distant stammer of the alarm. That's when I knew something was wrong. Not with the building, with the people. No one believed the system would fail, because they'd already convinced themselves I was the broken part of it. The hallway light flickered once. Then again, I opened the door. Nothing. Not a single staff member in sight. Most of the doors to the residence rooms were closed. There was a faint metallic smell in the air, acrid, sharp. A smell no one forgets once they've known it. Burning insulation. I moved slowly but deliberately toward the fire panel at the end of the corridor. It was blinking red, not a drill. I read the tag hanging off it. Next inspection. November 2024. A lie. I had reported 2 weeks ago that it was overdue for inspection. The night nurse told me it was on a list. Apparently we all were. I took a breath and yelled loud and clear. Fire alarm. Wake up. Nothing. Behind one door, I could hear the faint hiss of a white noise machine. Behind another, a television muttering to itself in the dark. I knocked hard on the first 3 doors I passed. No response. I turned back to my room, grabbed the rolled-up evacuation map I'd been studying, obsessively they said, and returned to the corridor. I knew I had 6 minutes, maybe less. There was no fire suppression system installed in the East Wing. They'd cited budget constraints. That wing had 12 residents, all in memory care, most with mobility issues, and only 1 night orderly. I headed there first. Halfway there, I ran into Denise, the only night nurse I trusted. She looked dazed, blinking under the hallway light like someone woken too fast from sleep. Her lipstick was still on, her shoes still off. "Rowena," she asked, "what are you doing out of bed?" I pointed behind her. "You smell that?" She sniffed. Her face changed. "Where's the intercom?" I asked. "You need to initiate full evacuation. I think it's malfunctioning." "You think?" "It's probably a sensor glitch," she said quickly. "We've had false alarms. This isn't one of them." She hesitated. Something shifted in her face. Her training clicked in finally, and she turned on her heel and ran toward the main desk. I didn't wait. As I approached the East Wing, the hallway grew darker. The motion lights weren't activating. I could see shadows moving, soft flickers against the walls. Smoke. It was beginning to crawl low, hugging the ceiling like it knew its way. I knocked harder now. Then pounded. I opened doors. "Wake up. We're evacuating." Some stirred. Some didn't. I helped one man. Henry, I think, into his wheelchair, told him to roll toward the main hall and not to stop. He asked, "Is it bingo time?" I kissed his forehead and said, "Yes, and you're already late." Others were harder. One woman screamed when I touched her arm. Another thought I was her daughter. A man named Walter insisted I was an angel from his war dream. It didn't matter. I got them moving. Somewhere behind me, I heard shouting. Denise's voice over the PA finally crackling into life. I smiled, but then I saw the smoke again. Thicker now. Pouring through the air vents above. The fire wasn't just here. It was in the building. Someone had to sound the external alarm. Someone had to call 911. And I wasn't sure anyone else had done it. I grabbed a phone off the wall and dialed. Busy. Another deadline. The flames hadn't reached me yet, but something else had neglect. And that would be the deadliest part of all. The last time I felt that particular kind of fear was 40 years ago, crawling through a collapsed stairwell in a burning hotel. A ceiling beam had come down behind me, blocking the only exit, and I'd had to squeeze 3 unconscious teenagers through a laundry chute just to get them clear. My uniform had melted into my back that day. But this time was worse. Because this time, no one believed there was even a fire. I shuffled toward the junction where the east and north wings met. Smoke seeped in faster now, hugging the floor, curling into the baseboards like it had a grudge. My legs ached, but I didn't stop. Every door I passed, I banged, like the devil himself was on the other side. Some opened, some didn't. The intercom crackled again. "This is Nurse Denise. This is not a drill. Please remain calm. Staff will assist you." I almost laughed. There was no staff. Not enough, at least. Half the people on night shift were usually asleep in the break room or watching TikToks behind the nurses' station. I'd seen them, heard them whisper about these old bats like we were a zoo exhibit. I'd warned them, documented it all in my notebook. The same one tucked in my cardigan pocket, now pressed against my heart like a bulletproof shield. A door swung open ahead of me, room 208. Mrs. Ellison stood there, trembling, wearing a pink nightgown and one sock. "Are we having a drill?" she asked, blinking at the haze. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "The building's on fire. You need to come with me." Her face didn't change. She had dementia. Yesterday she thought I was Shirley Temple. I took her hand anyway. I spotted an emergency wheelchair parked near the stairwell. It was supposed to be in her room. Strike 107. I got her seated, tied her robe around her shoulders, and pushed. The wheels squeaked like a dying bird. The smoke alarm overhead chirped once, then died. I whispered under my breath, "You're going to regret that." We turned the corner into the north wing, and I froze. Smoke gushed from under the double doors leading to the laundry unit. Flames licked around the bottom edges like hungry tongues. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a glitch. This was an inferno waiting to swallow every room on this floor. The sprinklers weren't active. The fire doors hadn't sealed. I didn't need to guess what that meant. The fire panel never triggered the suppression system. Someone had either shut it off, or it hadn't worked in years. They'd left us in a matchbox and struck the match. I looked down at Mrs. Ellison. Her eyes were glassy, watching the flickers of light like they were pretty stars on a ceiling. I backed up, wheeled her away from the laundry doors, and turned hard into the central corridor. That's when I heard it. Screaming. Not panic, not chaos. Just one singular scream, then silence. I pressed forward harder now. My lungs burned. My hand shook on the grip. My knee clicked with each step like a rusted hinge. I found Walter collapsed near the vending machine. He was still breathing barely. A nurse's call button dangled uselessly from his neck. I checked his pulse, gave him my shawl, and dragged him by the arms into the shadow of a corner column out of the path of the fire. He groaned something I couldn't hear. I didn't stop. I ran. It was a slow, pathetic run, but it was all I had left. As I reached the next hallway junction, I slammed the emergency alarm panel with my cane. Nothing. The glass didn't even shatter. Then I saw it. The side exit door, locked. From the outside. Emergency exit, chain shut. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't waste the air. I wheeled back to the main hallway where I saw 2 staff members finally running toward the smoke. One holding a radio, the other with a fire extinguisher that looked older than me. "You called 911, I rasped. One of them nodded, face pale. The other looked at me like I was part of the problem. "You shouldn't be out here, Ms. Carlyle. Please return to your room." I marched up to him, cane shaking hands, blistered, and jabbed the map into his chest. "There are 12 residents still unaccounted for. 4 in memory care. 3 in the East Wing who use wheelchairs. The alarm didn't trigger evacuation. The sprinklers didn't engage. The fire doors failed. And the laundry room is a goddamn crematorium." He blinked at me, stunned. "I used to write people up for less than this," I hissed. And then I turned around and went back into the smoke. Because if I didn't, no one else would. The real fire wasn't in the walls. It was in the system, and someone had to burn for it. I could feel the heat shifting not just in the air but in the floor. It was subtle at first, a low throb through the soles of my slippers. But anyone who's worked a fire knows what that means. The blaze had burrowed deep. It wasn't just licking walls or choking up linens. It was crawling beneath us, searching for oxygen, for space, for flesh. The next hallway had no windows, only yellow-tinted bulbs that flickered like dying stars. I counted doors as I passed. 6, 7, 8. Room 214. I knocked. No answer. I opened it anyway. Inside, a man named Joseph lay motionless under his bedsheet. I thought he was dead, but then he groaned so faintly I could have mistaken it for the floor creaking. His oxygen tube was still in place, but the portable tank had tipped over, hissing into the air. I pulled the sheet off him. He blinked at me once, then closed his eyes again. His skin was damp, not from sweat, from heat exposure. He wouldn't survive being wheeled through a smoke-filled corridor. I dragged the armchair near the window and positioned it in front of his bed. I tore the curtain down, soaked it in water from the carafe on his dresser, and used it as a makeshift air filter over his mouth and nose. It wasn't perfect, but it would buy him time. Then I left because I had to. They would call that abandonment. I called it triage. In the hallway, a new sound rose. Not human. Mechanical. The suppression system finally activated in the wrong section. I heard sprinklers dousing the east hallway, which had no smoke anymore. But this wing, still dry, still burning, still forgotten. Another door. 216. I didn't knock. I just pushed it open. Inside was Sarah, the woman who taught piano on Wednesdays. She was curled up on her recliner, hands over her ears. I thought it was a test, she whispered. They always said it's just testing. It's real, Sarah. Are you sure? Yes. I need you to get up. She looked down at her knees. They don't work. I reached for the wheeled commode in the corner of her bathroom. It wasn't ideal, but it had brakes and back support. I pulled it to her, steadied her, and began the slow transfer. Each time I lifted someone that night, I lost a little more of myself. My shoulders screamed. My back trembled. My lungs stung. But I kept going. By the time I had Sarah in the chair, the hallway behind me had changed color. It wasn't gray anymore. It was orange. Firelight shimmered across the walls, and with it came heat that made my skin feel brittle. I couldn't go back the way I came. The main corridor was closing. I pivoted the chair and turned toward the north stairwell, the one they swore they'd fixed last month after someone tripped on the broken handrail. I knew it was a lie, but I had no other option. Sarah's head lolled backward as I pushed her. Stay with me, I said. I used to play Chopin when I was scared, she murmured. Play it now in your head. As we reached the stairwell, I braced for the worst. The door handle was hot but not scalding. I yanked it open. Smoke billowed. Stairs barely visible, but not on fire. Not yet. I could work with that. I braked the chair and lifted Sarah as much as my aching bones would allow until I could ease her into a seated position on the top step. She clung to the railing, nodding once. I can scoot, she whispered. That's all I need you to do. I turned to go back again. Her hand shot out and grabbed mine. Don't, she said. You've done enough. No, I told her. I've done the minimum. And then I went back up. The smoke was thicker now. I had maybe 5 minutes before the corridor became a furnace. And I still hadn't heard sirens. Where were the firefighters? Where was the staff? Where was my son? I thought of him. Marcus. The one who signed the papers, paid the deposit, left a cheerful goodbye card on the nightstand. He thought he was keeping me safe. He thought he was helping. But what he did was hide me from the world. Out of sight, out of mind, out of danger, and out of dignity. He'd made it easy for them. Easy to ignore me. Easy to dismiss the warnings. Easy to let everything rot behind pastel walls and aromatherapy diffusers. I opened the next door. A cat ran out yowling. Inside, no one. Good. Next door. Room 221. Ethel. Blind. Diabetic. Almost deaf. She hadn't even heard the alarm. She was still sleeping. I approached gently, crouched beside her, touched her hand. She startled, swung, and hit me in the temple with a plastic cup. Ethel. I gasped. It's me, Rowena, she blinked. Fire, I said. We have to go. She didn't respond. I wasn't sure if she understood, but I helped her out of bed, wrapped a damp towel over her head, and half walked, half carried her into the hallway. I heard something then, far away. A siren, finally. Help was coming, but so was the fire, and I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The siren came closer, then louder, then suddenly, cut off. They were here. Somewhere outside, firefighters were unloading gear, cracking hoses, slamming boots against pavement. I imagined red lights flashing across the building's crumbling face, a face so carefully painted with flowers and smiles for brochures, now split open by negligence. I pulled Ethel into the stairwell and settled her onto the landing next to Sarah. Sarah looked up with smoke-streaked cheeks and reached for Ethel's hand. I thought I'd die alone, Sarah whispered. Not tonight, I said, pressing their shoulders together like two sandbags against the world. I turned again one last round. My body begged me to stop. Every joint burned. My head pounded. My hands had gone raw from pushing wheels and yanking doors. But I knew there were still people inside. I was counting them like pages in a book I couldn't leave unfinished. The hallway moaned behind me. Drywall split, glass cracked. Smoke wasn't smoke anymore. It was a wall dense and choking. I dropped to my knees, pulled my cardigan over my nose, and crawled. Room 224. A woman named Myra lived here. Quiet, kind, barely spoke. I'd only ever seen her during breakfast, pouring cream into her tea, with hands that trembled like leaves in the wind. I opened her door. Inside, pitch darkness. The power had failed in her wing. Myra, I called. No answer. Myra, it's Rowena. We have to leave. A soft sound like something sliding. Then her voice, a cracked whisper. I can't find my cane. I followed her voice and found her crouched near her dresser, eyes wide with fear. I helped her to her feet, pressed my cane into her palm, and took her arm. I can't walk fast, she said. That's okay, I replied. Neither can I. We moved slowly, painfully. The hallway was falling apart. Smoke alarms sparked above us like fireworks. I could feel heat behind the walls, heard something groan overhead. A beam maybe, or ductwork swelling in the heat. A piece of ceiling crashed just behind us. Don't stop, I said. We're almost there. I was lying. We weren't? Not yet. But Myra didn't know that. And I needed her to believe it. At the stairwell, I paused. Myra was trembling. I can't go down those. You don't have to, I said. I opened the fire hose cabinet nearby and grabbed the thick canvas rope meant for emergency lowering. The anchor was rusted. The window latch was stuck. I kicked it once, twice, and it snapped open. Fresh air slammed into my lungs. It felt like breathing for the first time. I looped the rope through the hinge, double-knotted it like they taught me back in the 70s, and began lowering Myra, one arm around her waist, one hand on the fraying grip. Myra sobbed quietly into my shoulder. She never let go. At the bottom, hands reached for her real hands. Firefighters. Finally. I yelled up through the window. There are still 3 more in the West Wing. They looked up at me. One nodded. Another raised a radio. We've got eyes on you. Don't go back in. But I already had, because I couldn't let go of the map in my head. Couldn't forget the names etched there. Walter, Francis, Arnold. They'd told me I was too old, too paranoid, too tired to be trusted. But I remembered every drill, every exit, every shortcut, every damn violation I'd pointed out that was still unfixed. I passed room 226, empty. Room 227 locked. I kicked the door. No give. I stepped back and rammed it with my shoulder. It opened on the second try. Frances was curled in the closet. Her oxygen tank had tipped, beeping faintly in protest. She was conscious but weak. I didn't think anyone was coming, she rasped. They weren't, I said, lifting her arm over my shoulder. But I did, she smiled. Knew you'd be the last one standing. We staggered back into the hall. The lights went out completely. Now we were in darkness, real thick post-electric silence. But I kept moving. One step, then another. We reached the emergency stairwell. And there, standing in the open door, was Marcus, my son. Mom, He looked like a ghost in scrubs. Someone had thrown a jacket over his pajamas. I saw the news, he said breathlessly. I came right away. They wouldn't let me in. But then someone said you were still inside. He reached for Frances. I let her go. Then I punched him in the chest. Not hard, just enough to make him flinch. You left me in a death trap, I said. And you didn't want to hear me when I warned you. I thought you were exaggerating. I turned away. You thought I was finished. And then I left him standing there as the hallway behind me collapsed in flames. I didn't look back. Not when the ceiling cracked. Not when the fire roared like an animal unleashed. Not even when I heard Marcus call my name again this time. Softer, not with fear, but with something worse. Realization. Realization that he had nearly buried me in that building dressed in lavender wallpaper and polite negligence. I focused on the stairs beneath my feet. Concrete chipped, scorched in places. The emergency lights flickered once before dying entirely. The only light now came from the glow crawling under the stairwell door and the flickering flashes from the window at the landing below. Every step felt like walking through glass. My lungs were scorched raw. My lips cracked. My eyes burned. But I held onto the railing like it was a promise. A firefighter met me halfway down helmet light, blinding me for a moment. Jesus, he muttered. We thought you were… I'm not. I cut in, voice hoarse. There's still one more. Room 229. Arnold. Can't walk. COPD. Needs oxygen. The firefighter lifted his radio. Unit 4, did you copy that? Static. I grabbed his wrist. No more waiting. You go now. I'll make it down. His eyes locked on mine, saw something in them maybe. That I wasn't just a frail old woman. That I had once worn a badge. That I knew fires, and I knew time. He nodded. I'm going. He turned and bolted back into the smoke, the stairwell swallowing him whole. I resumed my descent. By the time I reached the main exit, the lobby was unrecognizable. Soot smeared the walls. The chandelier had crashed onto the check-in desk, its crystals scattered like bones. And then I saw them, the ones I'd gotten out, huddled together under blankets, faces streaked with ash, some crying, others silent. Medics moved among them, checking pulses, pressing oxygen masks to trembling mouths. Denise spotted me first. She ran toward me, her eyes wide with something more than panic. Rowena, oh my God. I shook my head. Get more blankets? Some of them are still in shock. She nodded and ran. Behind me, the building shuddered. Fire curled out of the second-floor windows, now licking at the night sky. Sirens echoed from another block. More trucks arriving. Too late. Too late for anyone who hadn't fought their way out. I moved to the edge of the crowd, sat on the curb, and finally I allowed my body to feel the truth. Every inch of me ached. I was trembling. Not from fear, from holding it together too long. Someone placed a blanket around my shoulders. A young EMT knelt in front of me. Ma'am, are you all right? I looked into his eyes. I'm alive. He nodded. You saved people tonight. No, I said. I refused to let them be forgotten. He looked at me confused but didn't speak. Instead, he pulled out his stethoscope and listened to my chest. You've inhaled quite a bit of smoke. We need to get you checked. I let him work, but my eyes drifted upward toward the flames now dancing in the wings they'd promised were safe. They weren't. Nothing was. Not the inspections, not the protocols, not the panic buttons or fire doors or the emergency signage. None of it had worked. Only memory, only defiance, only will. Rowena. Marcus again. He pushed past a firefighter and knelt beside me. Mom, Jesus, you look like hell. I smiled. Better than a casket. His hands hovered over mine but didn't touch. He looked terrified to hold something so breakable. I should have listened to you, he whispered. I didn't answer. I thought putting you in here was helping. I didn't know they… You didn't want to know, I cut in. You wanted peace of mind, so you paid for it. And you got quiet. I didn't know it would be like this. No, I said. You didn't ask. He wiped at his face. Ash smeared across his cheek. I'll fix it, he said. I'll do whatever it takes. You can't unburn a building, Marcus. But I can listen now. That stopped me. Because I believed him. Not because he said it like a son, but because he said it like a man who finally saw his mother, the real her. The one he'd forgotten. The one still standing. They kept me overnight at the hospital, hooked up to oxygen, saline, and endless questions. Name? Rowena Carlyle. Age? 76. Do you know what day it is? Yes. The day they'll start listening. They ran scans, blood work, smoke inhalation assessments, everything short of slicing me open. One young nurse, probably 22, stared at me as if I were some miracle that had crawled out of a myth. She kept looking between my chart and my face like she expected one of them to be lying. "You're the one from the fire, right?" she whispered as she adjusted my IV line. "The one who got people out." "I'm the one who didn't wait for permission," I said, and she smiled nervously. Later that morning, a man in a cheap suit arrived. State Fire Marshal. Clipboard. Eyeglasses that fogged up as soon as he stepped into my room. "Mrs. Carlyle," he said, trying to sound like he wasn't intimidated. "We're collecting first-hand accounts of the incident. Your name came up quite a few times." "I'm not surprised," I replied. He cleared his throat. "There's speculation the facility didn't meet fire code." "It didn't." "You're certain?" "I was a fire inspector for 33 years. The only thing that passed inspection in that place was the mold." He raised an eyebrow. "You filed a complaint last month." 3. "And I made copies." "May I ask where those copies are?" I smiled and tapped my chest just above the heart monitor. "My cardigan pocket. The blue one, hanging in the closet." He retrieved it, unfolded the notebook, and his eyes widened. You could see the moment the lie stopped breathing. Floor plans, noted violations, photographs I'd asked Denise to print, handwritten observations, exit door on West Wing sticks, sprinklers in room 224 faulty, no alarm drill conducted since February. He looked up slowly. "Did anyone assist you in documenting this?" "No." "You kept these notes yourself?" I wasn't dead yet. He sat down. That was when I knew something had shifted. Not in the system, not in the law, but in the air. In the way people started looking at me, not as a patient, not as a liability, but as someone who had survived because she hadn't gone silent. 3 days later, I gave an interview to the local news. They tried to paint it like a story of grandmotherly bravery. You know the type. Soft piano music, slow zooms on my wrinkled hands, the phrase feisty spirit thrown around like a compliment. I corrected the anchor. "I didn't do this because I'm brave. I did it because they didn't." He blinked at me. "They," he asked. "The ones who get paid to care. The ones who installed silence instead of sprinklers. The ones who told me to rest while the building rusted around us." The segment aired that night, and within hours my phone rang. Congressional subcommittee. They were holding a hearing. "Would you be willing," the voice asked, "to testify about your experience?" I said yes before they finished the question. Marcus drove me to D.C. the following week. He didn't say much during the drive, just held the steering wheel like it was an apology. Sometimes he glanced at me as if memorizing my profile. Once he said quietly, "I've never known anyone like you." I said, "That's because you never saw me before." He nodded. Didn't argue. He knew it was true. In the hearing room, I sat at a long oak table, water glass to my right, microphone in front. Cameras rolled. Reporters typed, suits leaned forward. And I began. "My name is Rowena Carlyle. I am 76 years old. I am a former fire inspector, a mother, a grandmother, and a survivor." I paused. Not for effect, for breath. 3 weeks ago, I pulled 11 people out of a burning building while the systems designed to protect them failed entirely. And they didn't fail by accident. They failed because someone chose not to fix them. Gasps. Shifting papers. The usual. I leaned closer to the mic. "You keep talking about policy, about funding, about feasibility. But what we need, what we deserve, is the dignity of being heard before we're buried." There was silence. Beautiful, heavy silence. No one interrupted me after that. No timer buzzed. No questions rushed. They let me speak. And I made sure to say every name, every room number, every warning ignored. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to, because now finally they were listening. The day after the hearing, my face was on the front page of 3 newspapers. Not because I had done something extraordinary, but because the world had finally decided that surviving while old was extraordinary. Elder hero speaks truth to power. One headline read. Another said, retired fire inspector turns Washington upside down. Marcus saved them all. He brought them to my hospital room in a folder labeled For Mom Real Headlines. I didn't ask if he had read the stories. I didn't need to. His silence told me he had read every word twice, maybe 3 times. He sat beside me, folding and refolding the same edge of the newspaper until it tore. I should have listened, he said again. You were scared, I replied, watching him carefully. I thought I was being responsible, thought I was keeping you safe. I looked at his face, pale, guilt-ridden, worn. No one wants to imagine their mother on fire, I said. He laughed a short, dry sound and wiped the corner of his eye. In the weeks that followed, something unusual happened. I became wanted. Nursing groups called elder justice organizations asked for interviews. High schools invited me to speak. One retirement center even offered me a consulting position, part-time advisory only, paid. Why me? I asked the director. Because you're the only person we've heard of who walked through a burning building with a map and a mission. I said no, not because I didn't care, but because I had one more thing to do. It started with a phone call. A woman named Francesca, 68, lived in rural Virginia. Her husband had recently passed, and her children wanted to move her into a luxury care facility 2 hours away, one with white tablecloths, classical music, and zero history of actual emergency drills. I read your story, she said, voice trembling, and I thought, maybe I'm not crazy. You're not, I replied. But they keep saying I'm being difficult. Good, I said. Keep being difficult. That call became a letter, then a blog post, then a weekly column, the last one standing. Every Wednesday, I wrote about the quiet ways people get erased. Not violently, not loudly, just slowly. In paperwork, in policies, in padded walls with motion sensors and silence. I wrote about the doors that didn't open, the buttons that didn't work, the people who stopped checking, and I ended every column with the same line. When the alarms go off, be the one who stands up first. Months later, I was invited back to Washington. The Elder Housing Fire Safety Reform Act was up for vote. Rowena's Law, they called it unofficially. It proposed mandatory quarterly fire drills, independent inspections by third parties, and real-time reporting to families with relatives in care. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. They let me speak again, this time with a cane in one hand and Marcus beside me in the other. I spoke not just for myself, but for Francis and Sarah and Joseph, for Myra and Ethel, and even Walter, who had survived by some miracle, for every person who sat in a room thinking, no one's coming. I ended my speech the same way I ended my column. When the alarms go off, be the one who stands up first. The room rose in applause, and I stood taller than I had in years. Later on the drive home, Marcus said, you know, most people your age are writing memoirs. You're out here rewriting laws. I grinned. Maybe I'll write a memoir next. What'll you call it? I looked out the window, watched the sun flicker across the skyline like firelight across drywall. Then I said, the ones they forgot. He reached over, squeezed my hand. I never will again. And for once, I believed him. The winter after the fire was the quietest of my life. Not because the world stopped, no. It roared louder than ever. Cameras, emails, interviews. Even Oprah's people called once, though I never returned it. No, it was quiet in here. In my chest. In my mind. Because I wasn't fighting to be believed anymore. I'd spent years whispering truths into closed doors. Into clipboards. Into hands that only heard insurance premiums. Now when I spoke, people leaned in. Even the local fire department asked me to teach a training module. Elder evacuation from the elder's point of view. I stood in front of a room full of 20-something men and women in turnout gear and said, don't look at our wrinkles, look at our exits. They laughed, but then they wrote it down. One morning in January, Denise visited me, not in uniform, not with charts or forms, just a coat, a paper bag of muffins and eyes that didn't flinch anymore. Do you hate me? She asked softly. I shook my head. You listened when it counted. She sat beside me on the bench near my apartment window, the one that overlooked nothing but the back of a grocery store and a dumpster. Still, I liked it. It reminded me that the world was working, that trash went out and food came in, that things rotated no matter how long we sat still. She sighed. I should have sounded the alarm earlier. Should have trusted you. You weren't trained to listen to women like me, I said. You were trained to manage us. Her shoulders sagged. I've left nursing. I'm going into compliance work now. I want to make sure no one gets hushed again. I nodded, slow and steady. You'll be good at that. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver pin, a replica fire badge, the kind they give to civilian heroes. I asked the department if I could give you this, she said. I stared at it for a long time before taking it. It was heavy, but it felt right. In April, I got a letter from Frances, the woman from Virginia who'd called months earlier. Her kids had finally found a facility she liked, one with transparent inspection records, staff-to-resident ratios publicly posted, and weekly evacuation rehearsals. They hate it, she wrote, but I feel like a person again. At the bottom of the letter, she'd scrawled in shaky cursive, I stood up first. That line became a movement. T-shirts, pins, posters in community centers. I even saw a protest sign in a photo from San Francisco held by a man in a wheelchair outside a defunded elder housing complex. It said, You don't get to decide when I stop mattering. Stand up first. I wept when I saw it, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. On my 77th birthday, Marcus brought over a scrapbook. He titled it, The Building That Burned and the Woman Who Didn't. He filled it with photos, some of me standing before Congress, some of the survivors at a local garden party reunion, one of the burnt building being torn down, a bulldozer breaking through the fake stucco facade like a fist through paper. But the last page was empty. Reserved for what? I asked. He smiled. For what you're going to do next. I laughed. Harder than I had in years. I was planning to nap. He raised an eyebrow. Before or after your keynote next week? I groaned. What keynote? He grinned. The one in Boston. Elder Emergency Preparedness Conference. They're calling you the new face of resilience. God help them, I muttered. But in my chest I felt it. That fire again. Not the one that nearly killed me. The one that made sure I never went quiet again. Boston in the spring was always dramatic. The air still carried the bite of winter, but the flowers pushed up anyway. Stubborn, wild, unapologetic. I liked that. I felt like them. The conference was held in a glass and steel monstrosity downtown, all echoes and escalators, and LED panels flashing my name between words like resilience, emergency, and aging. They gave me a lanyard, a seat at the head table, a mic I didn't ask for. I stood before 300 attendees, most younger than my own children, and I told them what I knew. That silence kills faster than flames. That protocol is not the same as presence. That checklists don't open doors, people do. I didn't use slides. I used names. Sarah, Frances, Ethel, Walter. Their rooms, their stories, their sounds when I opened their doors. Disbelief, relief, confusion, gratitude. I spoke for 27 minutes. No applause breaks. No applause needed. When I was done, the room stood. Not out of politeness. Out of guilt, maybe. Out of respect, probably. Out of realization, certainly. After the talk, a young woman with streaks of blue in her hair approached me. Tears welled behind her glasses. My grandma died in a care home fire when I was 10, she whispered. Nobody ever talked about it. Like it was shameful. It wasn't, I said. It was preventable. She nodded, swallowing hard. I'm going into architecture now. I want to design buildings that don't forget people. I touched her shoulder. Then don't forget their names. She nodded. Wrote something on her conference badge in thick black Sharpie. Remember Sarah? That night, Marcus and I walked along the Charles River. He carried our dinner in paper bags, clam chowder and warm rolls from a place he used to love when he was in college. He said it was nostalgic. I said it was overpriced. We both laughed. Do you miss it? He asked. The firehouse. The inspections? No, I replied. I miss being listened to. He nodded. I think people are listening now. I looked at the water, dark and gleaming. Maybe, but they're still not hearing the ones without microphones. What do we do about that? I stopped walking, took a long breath, then said, we build one long enough to reach them. The next week, I founded the Watchtower Project, a nonprofit aimed at empowering seniors in care facilities to report violations anonymously. We created hotlines, digital drop boxes, and even trained volunteers to perform visual assessments in their own buildings. The motto, your life is not a liability. It's a record worth keeping. Within 3 months, we had over 1,000 submissions. Mold in ceilings, blocked fire exits, medication fridges failing, understaffed night shifts. One man in Kansas wrote, they put the emergency call buttons behind the beds where no one can reach if they fall. That line shook me. It wasn't a horror story. It was a system story. A story about how design becomes destiny when no one bothers to ask the people actually living there. In July, I received a letter from the family of Arnold, the last person pulled from room 229. He'd passed peacefully in his sleep 2 months after the fire. They said he never stopped talking about the woman with the map. They included a photo. Arnold smiling in a sunlit wheelchair holding a framed copy of my news article on his lap. The caption read, still standing, because she didn't sit down. I framed that photo and placed it by my front door. Every time I left my apartment, I nodded at it. A reminder that no fire is final. If you live long enough and loud enough, even the ashes will testify for you. It was late August when the lawsuit dropped. Class action, 37 families, against the ownership group behind the assisted living facility that nearly became my grave. Marcus brought the news with his usual soft knock and a look I'd come to recognize. Proud but cautious, like a child unsure if he's bringing home a gold star or a detention slip. You're named in it, he said, handing me the envelope. As the key witness, the primary catalyst for exposure. That's their wording. I opened the envelope slowly, careful not to tear the pages. Inside were affidavits, lists of violations, photographs, many of which matched the ones I'd kept in my old notebook. Some were worse. One image showed rusted fire extinguishers tagged as inspected by a company that hadn't existed in over a year. Another showed a fire door latched shut with a belt. A belt, as if flames respected leather. I stared at the pages, at the proof I had lived and nearly died collecting, and I felt something I didn't expect. Rage. Not the quick flare of frustration. The deep, slow burn of fury that builds beneath decades of being dismissed. They knew, I whispered. Marcus sat down beside me. They always knew, he said quietly. They just never thought anyone would make them prove it. The case made national news. Assisted living giant faces. Lawsuit after fire. Survivors speak out. Cable news anchors debated liability. Experts weighed in on elder abuse, neglect, fire safety, and staffing shortages. I refused most interview requests. Not because I didn't want to speak, but because I wanted to make sure what I said meant something. Instead, I wrote one op-ed, published it in The Atlantic under the title, "The System Didn't Fail Us. It Functioned Exactly as Designed." In it, I outlined the patterns. Cost-cutting masked as efficiency, elder silencing disguised as protective care, compliance treated like suggestion, memory loss weaponized to erase dissent. I wrote, they don't need to call us burdens. They've simply designed the building around that belief. The piece went viral. Within 48 hours, governors in 3 states announced new audits of elder facilities. One of them called me directly. Mrs. Carlyle, he said, I read your article twice, and I think I've failed people like you. You haven't failed me, I replied. You've failed them. Silence on the line. Then he asked, would you be willing to help us design something better? Only I said, if you're ready to burn down what's broken first. Back at home, I returned to my routine. Early mornings. Black tea. Letters from readers. Francesca sent another one. This time, a postcard from Italy. I took my first overseas trip in 15 years, she wrote. Your story reminded me I still had time. Another came from a nurse in Oregon. Your name is on our staff room wall under the heading, If Rowena Visits Be Ready. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my toast. Then one morning in September, a man showed up at my door. Clean suit, military posture, late 40s maybe. He introduced himself as Malcolm Tate, a fire captain from South Carolina. He'd driven up just to meet me. I had to, he said. One of the women you saved. Her granddaughter's in my station. She calls you Saint Rowena. I raised an eyebrow. I'm not a saint. He smiled. Neither are we. That's why I brought this. From his bag, he pulled out a helmet. Fire engine red. Brand new. The name Rowena printed across the front in bold white block letters. For the woman who retaught us all what courage looks like. I didn't speak for a long moment. Then I said, I'm going to need a bigger coat rack. That night, I placed the helmet on the shelf above my fireplace next to Arnold's photo and my original field notebook. I sat in my favorite chair, the one with the slightly tilted leg, and let the silence of justice settling fill the room. The kind of silence that follows not trauma, but triumph. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. A new season crept in, and for once I didn't fear it, because I'd already survived the worst fire of my life. And I was still standing. The night before the settlement hearing, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't anxiety, or fear, or even excitement. It was something older, deeper, a sensation I hadn't felt since I was a girl, with her father's hand on her shoulder, waiting for a school award to be announced. Not because I wanted recognition, but because I wanted the room to see him see me. Now the world was watching. But more importantly, so was the system. Marcus arrived early the next morning, coffee in one hand, manila folder in the other. You don't have to testify today, he said, sliding into the passenger seat as we drove to the courthouse. They have your deposition, your letters, your article. Everything's already made its mark. I kept my eyes on the road. Then I'm not going for them. He looked over. You're going for you. No, I said, for the ones who don't get called to the witness stand, because they don't speak loud enough, or because no one asks. He nodded. Didn't press further. He'd learned that sometimes silence from me meant more than a monologue. The courthouse was less grand than I imagined. Smelled like old books and bureaucracy. The kind of building where people file away lives between coffee breaks. I was seated in the third row behind the plaintiff table, surrounded by survivors and families of those who didn't make it out that night. One woman, Emily, held a photograph of her mother, Sarah, the same Sarah I'd helped down the stairs who passed 6 weeks after the fire from complications. She kept playing piano with her fingers even after she forgot how to speak. Emily whispered, "You gave me 6 more weeks of music." I swallowed the lump in my throat and squeezed her hand. The lawyer spoke. Plaintiff's first calm firm devastating. The defense tried to argue a rare system failure and unforeseeable escalation. Then they played the footage. Grainy hallway security camera videos. First a timestamp. 2. 14. Then, me, shuffling into the hallway, turning toward the fire panel, pausing, pounding on doors, then dragging walkers, lifting patients, pushing wheelchairs, then fire, smoke, and me still moving, still standing. The room held its breath. When the lights came back on, the judge looked over her glasses and said, "If this is your idea of unforeseeable, then I suggest you schedule a long meeting with the foreseeable." The verdict wasn't criminal that would come later, but the civil judgment was immediate. $60, $7 million in damages, divided among families, survivors, and the creation of a national oversight task force for assisted living facilities. The crowd erupted into muffled sobs and clasped hands. I didn't cry. Not yet. Not until Emily leaned toward me and whispered, she would have liked to know her death changed something. And that's when I let go. Let it all rush in. The guilt. The grief. The impossible burden of surviving when others didn't. After the verdict, reporters waited outside like crows ready to pick at quotes. One asked me, "Do you feel vindicated?" I paused, then said, "No, I feel responsible." Vindication is something you feel when you win a competition. This wasn't a game. This was a system that let people die. The only reason I'm standing here is because I knew how to scream louder than silence. She blinked, then looked down at her recorder. No more questions after that. That evening, I visited the memorial, a small marble bench placed in front of the site where the building once stood. Now just leveled dirt dotted with weeds and wildflowers, some planted by families, others by nature. On the bench, a plaque, "In memory of those lost, in honor of those who saved. Let none be forgotten." I sat there as the sun dipped behind the trees. A bird landed nearby just long enough to sing something short and strange. I imagined it was Sarah's final piano note. Light, imperfect, beautiful. And then I closed my eyes. Let the world fade into ash and wind. Not because I was tired, but because I had earned the stillness. The call came in October, crisp air, gold leaves. The kind of morning that made you grateful just to have lungs. Marcus answered the phone. He listened for a while, pacing the kitchen, occasionally nodding. Then he handed me the receiver. "It's the President's Council on Aging," he whispered. "They want to speak to you." I took the call. The voice on the other end was smooth, practiced, but not fake. It belonged to a woman late 50s by the sound of her. She introduced herself as Dr. Melissa Chu, chairwoman of the council. "We've reviewed your testimony, your writing, your advocacy. You've managed to do something we've been trying to do for years." "What's that?" I asked. "Make people care." She paused, then said, "We want to offer you a national appointment. Advisory position. No red tape. You'd speak directly to legislators, regulators, healthcare leaders. You'd have a seat at the table." I looked out my window, watched two squirrels fight over an acorn, thought about how long it had taken me to get someone to hand me a chair. "I accept," I said. They flew me to D.C. again. But this time, they didn't stick me in a dusty committee room. They brought me into a round table with state representatives, long-term care executives, and even a few engineers, the ones who designed care facilities, but had never spent a night in one. I stood. No speech, just words. "Stop designing these buildings like we're dying. Start designing them like we're still living." They blinked. I continued. "Put call buttons within reach. Paint the damn emergency exits in colors we can see. Add smoke alarms that speak, not just beep. Install backup power sources that don't fail when a squirrel sneezes." Someone laughed. I didn't. "Stop pretending our minds go before our instincts. We know when something's wrong. You just stop listening the moment we stop driving." And then I sat. They clapped. I didn't smile. I didn't have to. I knew they'd heard me. Weeks later, I got a package. No return address. No note. Inside, a simple hardcover book. Black cover, gold lettering. Title: "The Ones Who Didn't Listen." On the first page. "For Rowena Carlyle. Because of you, we will." I flipped through the pages. It was a collection of essays written by architects, nurses, EMTs, and even two former state officials, each describing the moment they read my story and decided to change something. One nurse described unbolting every chained exit in her facility. An architect rewrote his entire thesis. I thought I was designing for peace, but I was just designing for silence. Another page. I stopped saying facility. I started saying home. I closed the book, heart full, in a way I hadn't expected. Not because I was changing buildings, but because I was changing language, and language was where forgetting started. Marcus took me to dinner that night. Nothing fancy, just a little Italian place tucked behind a bookstore. Over fettuccine and red wine, he said, "You know, you've done more in 1 year than most people do in a lifetime." I shook my head. "I didn't do more. I just finally had a microphone." He leaned forward. "You ever think about what life would have been like if you'd had this platform 20 years ago?" I looked at the candle between us. Soft light. Flickering but steady. "No," I said, "because 20 years ago the fire hadn't come for me yet." He nodded. "I'm proud of you, Mom." I looked up sharply. He rarely said it. Not because he didn't feel it, but because, like most men raised in the shadow of bigger expectations, he'd never learned how to say it. So when he did, it meant something. I reached across the table, placed my hand over his. "I know." And for the first time in years, we ate in a silence that didn't need to be filled, because everything that needed saying had already been said. The winter that followed brought snow. Real snow, not just the light dusting cities pretend is magical. This was weighty snow, thick and unapologetic, the kind that clings to window panes and buries sidewalks like forgotten promises. I watched it fall from my living room window, tea in hand, notebook in lap. My arthritis flared in the cold, but I welcomed it. Pain was still proof of presence. The Watchtower project had grown. What began as a hotline now had regional chapters. We were training seniors as safety auditors not to become enforcers, but to become witnesses. Because witnessing was the first step toward change. They called it Rowena's Army. I called it retirement. Every week, new letters came. One from a woman in Montana who refused to sign into a facility until they passed her personal fire drill. One from a granddaughter who said, "Your story made me keep asking questions." Turns out my grandma's place hadn't been inspected in 4 years. Another arrived in thick stationery, gold embossed. From the desk of the Surgeon General. Inside was a quote. "The measure of a system is not how it serves the strong, but how it protects the vulnerable." Below it, a note. "Thank you for raising the measure." I didn't hang that one. I tucked it in my drawer, right next to the building inspection report from the day I moved into that care home. The one that said, "All systems operational." One Sunday morning, Marcus brought over his daughter, my granddaughter Lucy. She was 8. Bright-eyed, whip-smart, already fluent in sarcasm and spreadsheets. She climbed into my lap without asking and said, "Are you that grandma?" "What grandma?" "The one with the fire and the cane and the notebook." I smiled. "I suppose I am." She looked at me serious. "Did it hurt?" I paused. "Yes," I said. "But not just the smoke or the heat. What hurt more was knowing people knew it was dangerous and did nothing." She nodded slowly. "That's dumb," she said. I laughed. "Yes. Yes, it is." Then she pulled something out of her backpack, a crayon drawing. Stick figures, flames, a building, and me, cape fluttering in the wind, arms wide. People behind me. She'd labeled it, "Grandma saves the world." I tacked it to the fridge, not because I believed it, but because she did, and that was enough. That night I wrote a letter. To be opened in 10 years, by Lucy, my darling girl. If you're reading this, it means I'm either very old or very gone. Either way, I want you to remember this. The world will always tell you to sit down, to stay quiet, to not make trouble. Make it anyway. Good trouble. Fire is loud, but so are you. Love. Grandma Rowe. I sealed it, marked it, to be opened when you need courage. By spring I was tired, not from advocacy or memory, but from carrying the weight of survival without pause. So I paused, started painting again. Small canvases, abstract lines, bright reds and oranges and deep ash grays. I called the series Residue. Marcus didn't understand it. Lucy said it looked like feelings. That was good enough for me. I donated 3 of them to the local fire department, hung one in the watchtower office, and kept one above my bed, not to remember the fire, but to remember what I walked through. And that, I walked out. Still standing, still witnessing, still burning, but only in the ways that mattered. There's a peculiar thing that happens when people start referring to you in the past tense while you're still alive. At conferences, I became the woman who survived the fire. At fundraisers, I was the catalyst for elder reform. In emails, Rowena Carlyle hero advocate icon. Icon. I hated that word. It sounded like something you dusted or carved into stone. Cold. Fixed. Finished. I wasn't finished. I was still angry, still remembering, still watching the news and seeing new fires, metaphorical and otherwise, consuming people who weren't as lucky or loud or heard. And that meant I still had work to do. The National Safety Task Force offered me a formal role, permanent this time, policy consultant for elder-centric infrastructure. I turned it down, not because I wasn't honored, but because I didn't want to become part of the machine I had spent my twilight years kicking. Instead, I proposed a counteroffer. Let me train the people who make the rules. Inspectors, architects, lawmakers. The ones who check boxes without knowing whose lives are inside them. They agreed. And so once a month I traveled to a different state, walked into cold, fluorescent-lit rooms and told stories. Not statistics, not theory. Stories. About Ethel's soft hands clutching mine in the stairwell. About Walter's gasping breath and the scent of scorched vinyl. About the woman with Alzheimer's who whispered, "Is this the rapture?" when the flames danced outside her window. And every time I ended with the same question, "Would you want your mother to die like that?" The silence that followed. That was policy being rewritten in real time. One night, I sat on my balcony watching storm clouds gather like thoughts I hadn't voiced yet. Marcus called. You up for a little media attention? He asked. Define little. PBS wants to do a documentary. I groaned. They'll edit out the good parts. I told them no edits without your approval. I chuckled. And who made you my manager? He hesitated, then said quietly, someone who finally knows how lucky he is to be your son. That shut me up. The kind of silence that feels like gratitude, knocking softly on the door of forgiveness. The documentary crew arrived a week later. 2 cameras, 1 drone. A young director with an old soul. They interviewed survivors, firefighters, even the building's former janitor, who had quit a week before the fire. He said she warned them, over and over. They just didn't listen. They never listen until someone dies. They followed me through the rebuilt facility, now a community center outfitted with fire suppression systems I helped design. They filmed me reading Lucy a story in the garden. She asked if they could put her in the movie too. Only if you're playing yourself, I said. She grinned. Then I want to be the sequel. The crew laughed. I didn't, because I meant it. She was the sequel, the next witness, the next watchtower. After filming wrapped, the director gave me a flash drive. This is the rough cut, he said. You're welcome to review it before we submit. I thanked him, then forgot about it. For days I avoided it. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't want to see myself frozen on screen, paused and played like a relic. Then one rainy morning I pressed play. It opened with silence, then a single match lighting, followed by my voice. They said the fire alarm didn't matter until I was the only one left standing. The screen faded to black, then flickered back to me, walking the hallways of the old building, my cane tapping softly against the tile. Not a hero, not an icon, just a woman with a notebook and a memory no one could extinguish. I watched all 40 minutes. When it ended, I didn't cry. I just whispered, good, because it wasn't about me. It was about what we forgot, and who we must never forget again. The final letter came in the spring. It was handwritten, thick cream paper cursive that wavered but held strength. No return address, just a P.O. box in Arizona. Inside 2 things, a letter and a clipping. The letter read, Dear Miss Carlyle, I am the daughter of one of the nurses who was on shift the night of the fire. My mother never recovered from the guilt. She passed last month. In her nightstand we found an envelope marked, For Rowena if she's still alive. She had written you a note. The second page was shorter, unsteady script. Rowena, you told me I'd regret not listening. You were right. I heard the alarm. I thought it was just another false one. I froze. And because I froze, someone almost died. You didn't freeze. You moved. I'm sorry I wasn't one of the good ones. But I want you to know that night changed me. I started reporting, started documenting, quietly but consistently. I followed your lead, even if you never saw it. Thank you for not letting the rest of us burn in silence. M. I sat at the table, letter trembling in my hands, and stared at the clipping. It was a photo of the rebuilt facility, now a fully certified community hub with ADA accessible design, 247 on-site medical presence, and a garden named the Rowena Memorial Walk. Marcus had joked about it once. Now it was real. And I didn't know how to feel. Grief. Pride. Maybe both. That evening, Lucy climbed into my lap again, taller, now older, but still carrying that electric little pulse of life I recognized in myself. Grandma, she said, did the fire scare you? I thought about it. About the hallway, the smoke, the heat, the pounding in my ears. Then I said yes, but I wasn't scared of the fire itself. What were you scared of? I looked at her and told the truth, that no one would believe it happened. She was quiet for a moment. Then, they believe it now. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in warm reds and quiet golds. Lucy pointed. Looks like fire. I nodded. But this one doesn't burn. No, I said. This one reminds. In the stillness of twilight, with the wind stirring memories like pages, I thought about what legacy really means. Not awards. Not headlines. Not buildings with your name on a plaque. But a girl, sitting next to you, learning how to listen, so that when it's her turn to stand, she won't hesitate. She'll move. And when the alarms scream real or metaphorical, she'll remember that once upon a time a woman too old to matter stood up anyway and changed everything. In the end, fire didn't take me. Silence almost did. But that night, the night the alarms failed and the ceilings cracked, I remembered who I was. Not a resident. Not a number on a chart. Not someone waiting to be managed. I was Rowena Carlyle, fire inspector, mother, survivor. And in a world that tells older women to sit down and be grateful, I stood up and became the warning. I wrote names, kicked doors, dragged wheelchairs through smoke. And I remembered every single person who tried to tell me to go back to my room. They weren't cruel, just comfortable, but comfort is where danger hides. So I'll leave you with this. The next time someone tells you that your instincts are wrong, that your age makes your voice quieter, that your time has passed, look them in the eye and say, I stood up before, I'll do it again. Because sometimes justice doesn't come in sirens or headlines. It comes in the quiet, in the slow turning of a doorknob, in the trembling hands of a woman with a notebook and a spine that won't bend. It comes when someone finally listens. And when the fire comes again, and it will make sure someone like you is standing in its way, let them write you off. Just make sure you're the last one they forget, the last one standing.